I'm feeling pretty good today because I get to talk about landscape photography. And I assume if you all are here, you probably enjoy being in the outdoors, nature, beaches, mountains, deserts, forests, whatever it may be. And to me, I just love it. It's a real spiritual experience for me. And it really allows my mind to be free. And I can get into that zone that I need to be to create really wonderful, or at least expressive images. But the thing about creating great landscapes is that it's more than just having a great landscape in front of you. I mean, think about how often you might be driving someplace in the middle of the day and you'll see something and you'll take a picture of it and you get it back and you think, oh, yeah, it's okay, but it didn't really have that feeling that I wanted it to. Well, we've got to get several things sort of coalescing together to really create a dynamic and beautiful landscape. First of all, it's light. You know, I mean, the hours that we can actually photograph are pretty narrow. We're looking at about 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon. This is just after sunrise. So in 15-minute section, this particular light happens, and then it doesn't happen again until the next morning. It's those moments of light that really make a landscape sing. Whether it's a moment in time, like capturing this wave with the sunlight just coming in behind it, or whether it's light, just coming up underneath a cloud and bathing this wheat field in golden warm light while you have the cool light from the clouds above. It's those moments in time that really make a dynamic landscape. And so we have to figure out how we can keep all of our important things together. That is light. We've got to have light. We've got to have good light. We've got to have a good camera position. And that's something that's often overlooked, which we'll talk about. And we've got to use the right focal length. All these things are going to come together to create a beautiful landscape. So first, we're going to start off with how you need to set your camera up. We've got to have the right camera settings in order to capture great landscapes. First of all, how many of y'all shooting JPEG in here? Raise your hands, just a few? Okay. I highly recommend shooting in RAW. The rest of you all are already there, but most landscape images are going to take a fair amount of post-processing. This has always been that way. When I used to work in the darkroom, you know, I'd spend hours and hours, sometimes days, on a print. And it's no different now. So what we're going to often want to do is add contrast or reduce contrast, add saturation, change the color balance, and all those things tend to, well, they tend to chip away at your image, and we want to keep a nice high image quality because that's what's been passed down to us from the masters like Ansel Adams and Galen Rao and all these wonderful photographers. So we're going to need to post-process. Now, this would be a typical histogram of a very flat scene that we need to add contrast to really make it feel, to really make it pop. Now, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to take this edge of the histogram and spread it out over here and this edge over here to give the image full dynamic range, full contrast. All right, well, when we do that, we're going to spread it out by adding contrast in. What happens to the JPEG is that it actually starts to get destroyed a little bit. So here's the JPEG file and here's the RAW file. Now, what we're seeing here is something called gapping. You won't see it if you're using Lightroom, but you will see it if you're using Photoshop. And it represents loss of image information. And this is so important, folks, because it's literally tonal gradations that are being removed from your file. So imagine we're shooting, say, fall foliage, and the colors in the leaves or the grasses or whatever it may be go from yellow to yellow-orange to yellow-orange-orange and then to an orange. Well, what's happening with this gapping is those two intermediate gradient tones are being pulled out, and it just abuts yellow to orange. And that's a very hard break. And that's what we call posterization. All right? So we don't want to experience posterization in our JPEG files. So we want to shoot in RAW. That's going to give us the best image quality. All right? Now, The other thing is we want to keep our ISOs as low as possible. This is also going to create high quality. So it's really standard for us to be shooting at ISO 100, ISO 200, so we don't get a lot of noise. Now, the thing about what's interesting about photography these days is it's so commonly viewed on the computer. Now, a print or a small image on the computer, it's really, really hard to see whether it's a high quality image or not. Of course, not in the too far distant past, everything was measured by a print. And so your prints would be a fairly large size. And any inadequacies or problems that you may have experienced became glaring. All right. So if you're looking at a screen and you were to see this ISO 100 shot and then turn around and look at a 1600 ISO shot, you might not see a real difference. But if you actually look at the print side by side, it's going to start to look more like that, where you're starting to see all that grit and grain and that sandpaper look. And that's just not very pleasant to see. All right, so we want to keep our ISOs as low as possible. For me, I am almost always at 100 unless I have a really, really important reason to go up to 200 and 400 if I have to, but pretty rare indeed. All right, now, white balance. White balance is so simple when it comes to landscape photography. A lot of people get hung up on white balance and they think a lot about it. I urge you not to think a lot about it. It's very simple. Do you remember anybody in here photographed last century when we used to use that film stuff? Anybody remember? Did anybody have auto film? No. We had daylight film and there was tungsten film too. But everything we shot was in daylight. It was in daylight mode. All right, well, it's gonna be the same thing here, you guys. You want to set your white balance to the prevailing light. This is really important to capture natural tones. So if you see that sun up in the sky, put it on that sun icon. That simple, all right? Now, Nikon calls that direct sunlight. Canon calls it daylight. That's all you need. That is gonna give you your natural colors. This is a very strange colored mountain, right? This heavy in iron ore, so it's got a lot of orange colors to it. Auto white balance would not do a good job with this. This is natural. This is what it looks like. And it's under a sunny day, and so the daylight renders it natural. Just like these canyons in the west, right? Orange sandstone. Again, auto would not do a great job here. So we want to shoot for the prevailing light. Remember that daylight renders colors as they actually are. All right, so if we were to bring a camera that's set on daylight white balance into an indoor scene, we would actually see the colors of the lights. Green for fluorescent, yellow for tungsten, so on and so forth. So when we're shooting things like sunset, we want that natural daylight setting. We don't want the auto setting. I've heard a lot of photographers say, oh, whenever I shoot sunsets, I just put it on the cloudy setting. Don't do it. Don't do it. The reason is the cloudy setting, what it does is it adds more warmth into the scene. But many times sunsets are going to be a mix of blue and warm. So when you just by default throw it into the cloudy mode, you're enriching or enhancing your warm tones, but at the same time you're desaturating your blue tones in the sky. So I don't think it's a good idea to do that. Shoot it in daylight mode for your sunrises and sunsets. Save your cloudy setting for overcast days. And I'm not talking about a couple puffy white clouds up in the sky, obscuring the sun every now and again. I mean, overcast, all right? So it's gonna add a little bit of yellow to cancel out that blue that's very, very prominent on cloudy days. So here's a little leaf and some grasses, frost covered. It's an overcast day. This was shot on daylight, and you can see that blue cast. Now, take that and put your camera on cloudy white balance instead, and you get an extra bit of vibrance in there, an extra bit of warmth. Almost always makes for a nicer image, all right? Now, open shade is something we experience a lot in the mountains. Not as much in flat areas, but open shade is when you can see, but there's no sunlight hitting you. So let's say we're down in this valley here. Well, the sun's kind of setting behind the mountain, but it's not down below the horizon yet, so it's still daytime. You know, it's maybe another hour before the sun sets or something. Well, that warm light of the sun is not able to penetrate this mountain to get down into the valley. But we can see, so where's the light coming from? The blue sky overhead. So literally, all that light that's coming down from the blue sky is what's illuminating us and our subject before us. So it is as blue as the blue sky. I was standing in Death Valley one morning, and I saw my long shadow, and I looked at that shadow and I thought, wow, it is so blue, because I was standing on the salt flats. And here you can see the depth of blue, especially if you look at these monitors over here. You can see the depth of blue in that shadow. That's because the only illumination there is from the sky. So that is the color of open shade. And that's typically too blue for the situations that we want to photograph in. So the open shade setting is going to add a little bit more warmth to your scene. Here's a waterfall on my Colorado workshop, and you can see how blue it is. The water, literally, people, is the color of the blue sky. All right? Put that to open shade, and it clears that color cast. When a color cast becomes cleared from an image, what it typically does is gives you better color separation. And that better color separation will make it appear like it's more contrasty. All right, even though it's technically not. All right, so getting your white balance right is easy, but also very important. Now, you'll notice I haven't mentioned auto mode because I'm not a big fan of it for outdoor shooting. There's times when I will use auto mode, maybe shooting at night, sometimes star trails, certainly indoors, things like that, but not for your typical landscape photography, because the way it is, the way it's designed is to look at the brightest pixels in your scene, maybe the top, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000 pixels, and see if there's a color cast. So if we're indoors here, it works wonderfully because it picks up all the lights, and it'll see that it's a yellow cast to it, and it'll fix that, and then the whole rest of the scene becomes nicely color balanced. But in a picture like this, we have here a snow cap that's reflecting a lot of the blue sky. So that snow cap is overly blue. The camera sees that and then makes it yellow. Now I want you guys to look at the difference in the sky here between the auto and the daylight. Of course, daylight, the one on the bottom. Notice how that sky has become desaturated. That's because that yellow is going across and desaturating the blue. All right, so auto has failed us now. And a lot of people will say, oh yeah, but I can just change that back in Lightroom. Well, yes, sure, you can, but now you're gonna have to make extra effort to remember exactly what color that was. Is that 3 points of magenta or 7, 6 points of green? Exactly where was it? We're not sure. All right, so don't use auto when you have a very well-known color situation. Here I'm in Zion National Park. Well, there is no real whites in here or no neutrals. This was shot on daylight. It was sort of a soft, hazy day. This is the natural color of the fall foliage. Y'all being from the Northeast, you know what I'm talking about. Well, this is what it looked like when it was shot on auto. Yeah, now, to try to get that direct sunlight back to the auto one, that's gonna be really hard to figure out if you're not accustomed to working with color. So it's far easier to do it in the beginning. When it comes to filters, there's really only one filter that we absolutely need for landscape photography, and that's our polarizer. We'll call it a circular polarizer. If you have an old linear polarizer, you don't want to use that on your modern cameras. That was for cameras 30 years ago. Okay, that's long since been no good anymore. So circular polarizer is what we want. I used to carry a big stack of filters when I'd go out and photograph, but it's unnecessary now. The circular polarizer does everything we need it to do, okay? So obviously it darkens the blue sky, it cuts through haze, removes reflection, increases saturation. So let's look at each one of these in their stead. So in order to make a polarizer darken the blue sky, what you need to do is be 90 degrees to it. It's really simple if you're bad in math. Don't worry about 90 degrees. Just think if the sun is on your shoulder, you can polarize the sky in front of you. That's it. You cannot polarize into the sun, nor can you polarize away from the sun, but on your shoulder, front, and back. So, questions for later. So we can very easily polarize the sky and make it darker. And this is a very important part of landscape photography because many times the sky will actually draw us out or up and away from the landscape. And we want to keep our eyes down in the landscape. So with this image here, just I put on my polarizer and spun it, and immediately it changes to a much darker blue sky, complete with a little dust spot right there. Isn't that nice? Yeah, that doesn't come with the polarizer, that's extra. All right, so you can also, I mean, look at the depth of the, and you might be better looking at these monitors, but look at the depth of the tone in the landscape. The sky gets darker and the landscape actually gets brighter. All right, so using this polarizer to darken the blue sky, like I said, will keep you from drifting out of the image and out into the top. And just spinning that polarizer a little bit is all you need to do. All right, and while you're doing that, you will typically get more color saturation as well, which is an added bonus, and warm up your scene a little bit. Now, the polarizer is not an on-off filter. It's what they call WYSIWYG, right? It's what you see is what you get. So as you spin it, it'll actually go in different amounts of strength. So you don't just put it on and say, okay, that's good, and shoot. You're gonna put it on and you're gonna spin it and spin it more and spin it more and spin it more. So here's an example where I took several shots at different degrees of the polarizer. What I want you to pay attention to is the depth of the blue sky, of course, but also notice the tiled roof. We're gonna get some saturation in there. So I spin it just a little bit, we get a little bit more saturation. Spin it a little bit more, deeper blue sky, more saturation in the tile roof. A little bit more, a little bit more. Sometimes it starts to get fake if you go too far. But ultimately, it's your choice. You can go with no polarization, which is typically the least desirable, some polarization or a lot of polarization. And every situation is going to be different. One of the biggest questions I get on my workshops is, you know, we'll get out of the car, or be hiking down a trail, and people will say, Tim, is this a good spot for a polarizer? I'm not sure. I don't know which direction you're facing. I don't know what you've got included in your frame, and I don't know what lens you're using. So all of those things come into play. So the best way to use your polarizer is simply screw it on and look and spin it. If nothing happens, take it off. If something good happens, leave it on. It's just that simple, really. All right. But we've got to be careful with blue skies, people, because if the sun can only polarize a section of the sky, we could run into the problem where we shot a wide enough angle lens, it'll take in more than what can be polarized. So that's what's happening here. And you can see this area over here is not being polarized at all, and this section is. This looks very funny. It looks odd. We don't like to see it in our images. All right, so that's not to say that you cannot use a polarizer on a wide angle lens. It's just that you need to use it with caution. So, you know, if there was like a big cloud over in here, or just some clouds in this section, it would break up the sky and then it wouldn't be as obvious, you know, and then it might be okay. But when you have a blank blue sky like this, no good. It just becomes real obvious. So you're better off shooting it without the polarizer and then darkening the blue sky down if necessary after the fact. All right. So again, you can see that in your camera. What you see is what you get. So you will not be fooled if you're paying attention. Now, the polarizer also will cut through haze. I mean, it's not like a haze filter, you guys. It actually does something. It works. All right, a haze filter doesn't really do much at all. So this is without polarization, and then with polarization. So you can see that it does a pretty dramatic job of cutting through the haze. But what I also want y'all to notice is notice how it warms it up too, right? Cutting through that haze gets rid of some of that extra blue in the scene and gives it a warmer feeling that as photographers we enjoy. Same thing here. No polarizer, and then polarizer. Right? Big difference. Now, it also removes reflection. Now, like this blue sky, you've got to be at the correct angle. You're not going to be out there with a protractor figuring out exactly where 35 degrees is, you know? So what you do is you put it on your polarizer, or you put your polarizer on and spin it. If the reflection goes away, you're in a good spot. If it doesn't, you're going to have to change your angle to the subject, meaning you'll have to get lower, higher, move right, move left. Because if you spin it and it doesn't go gone, it's not going to get gone. All right. But here I was in the right angle, and then spinning the polarizer, you know, completely changes this, you know, I mean, just night and day, right? Same thing here, lily pads. And there's a lot of glare, a lot of water on those lily pads, causing a lot of reflection. So the polarizer, you know, just completely brings the color back. This is why I use this filter probably about 85% of the time. It's almost always on my camera when I'm outdoor shooting. All right. Increases color saturation as well. So when you are when you're outside, even you know, in the bright sunny day, you're getting glare off of waxy surfaces such as leaves and grasses and things like that. But if you spin your polarizer, you can actually increase that, you know, that saturation quite a bit. All right. Here's a typical middle of the day scene. This is let's see, on my Colorado workshop, and watch what the polarizer does to the warmth, in addition to the blue sky. That's not, there's no Lightroom or Photoshop being added in there, you guys. That's just spinning the polarizer. All right. So it makes a huge difference. Now, when it comes to the polarizers, because you should be using it most of the time, you want to get yourself a good one. I know where you can buy them. All right. What you want to get is multi-coated filters, you guys. Multi-coated filters are going to have extra layers of coating that are going to help that light be transmitted very well. It's going to add contrast and sharpness to your to your final image. If you buy less expensive filters, they're not going to do as good of a job. All right. Not to mention the metal that surrounds the glass may be aluminum as opposed to, say, brass, and it tends to bind on your lens. So buying a more expensive polarizing filter, I think, is well worth the money. Now, when it comes to the brands that I like, I prefer Heliopan and B+W. I actually use B+W. That's my brand. Less expensive alternatives, as you can see, are Tiffin and Hoya. Now, you just want to beware, like Joe's filter brand. Sorry, Joe. I know there's one out there. But getting yourself a good filter is really important. Think about it. You all go out and you spend a lot of money on your lens. It might be $300, it might be $500, it might be $1,000 on your lens. If you then purchase a $10 filter to put over that, guess what happens to your quality? Shh, boom. All right. Now, how many people in here keep their lens protected? Right? UV filter? All right. How many of you take your UV filter off before you put your polarizer on? I believe that. You guys, we've got to take those filters off. And here's the reason why. When you start stacking glass in front of one another, you're ultimately driving down the quality. And I think we all know that lens is the most important aspect in the quality chain of our camera and sensor and everything else, right? It's got to be a good lens. Well, if we put on a UV and then put on a polarizer in front of that, it's really starting to drive down the quality of our resulting image. So my suggestion to you all is well, you could be like me. I'm a little bit of a maverick, but to protect my lens, I use a lens cap. Yeah. obviously I'm being facetious, but take that UV filter off before you put your polarizer on, you guys. You'll have much higher quality. Now for me, I actually do use my polarizer as, you know, I use it as my protection filter because it's on almost all the time. I don't bother with a UV filter. Saves me a little bit of money. If you are going to use a UV filter for your lens protection, I recommend getting a good one because it's on all the time. It's not a neutral piece of glass that doesn't have any effect on your camera. It does. So once again, buy yourself a nice B&W or Heliopan to really keep that high quality up. All right. You know, we can only work, well, that's not entirely true, but I mean, we tend to work by emulating the people that have come before us, before we strike out on our own and start making our own artwork. So when we look to the past masters, we look at things like they shot 4x5 and 8x10. So the images were just full of depth and full of detail. And so we want that. So that's why we shoot low ISOs. That's why we like to have full frame cameras if possible. Well, one of the things they passed down to us was deep depth of field. They tried pictorialism, you know, they tried having things out of focus, and eventually they landed on, if you're shooting landscape and this sort of stuff, a lot of depth of field is pretty important. So in most of our landscape photographs, and almost every one of my landscape photographs, I want everything to be sharp. Right from the foreground, every tiny little bit, all the way to the deepest background. It's just kind of what we want to see, you know? Same thing here. You can see absolutely sharp in the foreground. That background's actually a little out of focus, but we won't talk about that. If you have to let something go, let it be the background ever so slightly. But again, you guys, rocks right in the foreground all the way to the mountains in the back. It's critical that we have deep depth of field in our landscape imagery. So, of course we know we want to use those small apertures, right? 8, 11, 16, and 22. But I've found as of late that people hear this, and then what they'll do is they'll go out and shoot landscapes and they'll just lock their camera onto 22 and just keep shooting. And that's not a good idea, folks. And the reason is in theory, 22 gives you the most depth of field. But in reality, the smallest aperture on your lens, whether it be f22 or f32 or f16, whatever the smallest one is on your lens, it's always going to cause a certain amount of, or it's going to suffer from light diffraction, which means your whole image quality tends to soften down just a little bit. In some cases, not just a little bit, but a lot. So, yes, it'll give you the most apparent depth of field, but it doesn't give you your highest image quality. So, for that reason, I never say never, but almost never shoot at f22. I'll always go to one aperture below. All right, so 16 on this particular lens here. Now, to get absolute sharp depth of field all the way throughout, we have to focus in the right spot. You have probably heard of the 1/3, 2/3 rule, which states that when you focus on any given point, what you're doing is getting only that plane in sharp focus. And as you begin to stop down, the depth of field will grow 1/3 towards the camera and 2/3 away. That's where the 1/3, 2/3 rule comes from. Okay, so what we'll do is typically we'll step up to a scene, we'll either focus inadvertently on the furthest thing from our scene or we focus on the closest thing in our scene. Now, what happens if we do this, folks, is as you begin to stop down, your depth of field is expanding towards your camera. So now all of the air is very sharp. It's just kind of like wasting the depth of field, right? I mean, if we could just take that whole thing and just move it over, why then we would have the depth of field we need. So what we want to do is focus 1/3 of the way into the frame. And then as we stop down, our depth of field will expand and pick up the front and 2/3 behind to pick up the back. All right, so we want to focus 1/3 of the way into the scene. And I've got to tell you, that sort of has been in the past the biggest mystery to landscape photography. Where's 1/3 of the way through the frame? You know, I mean, how can you calculate 1/3 between 2 feet and something called infinity. You know, there's no mathematical calculation for that. I mean, there is, but it's beyond my skills. So this is one of the reasons that I actually use fixed lenses for my landscape photography. All my wide angle lenses are all fixed, 24, 28, 35, 50, because I still have what's called the depth of field scale. Now, this is your distance scale, and the line right in the center is your focusing mark. And for those of you that remember these old lenses, you'll probably remember how they work. It's a snap to get everything sharp. Right now, this lens is focused at infinity, all right? And if I stop down to f11, I will get from there to there sharp. So I'll get from 15 feet to past infinity. If I stop down to 16, I'll get from 5 feet to past infinity. If I stop down to 22, 3 feet to past infinity. Well, you can see if I focus my lens at this point, I'm really wasting a whole lot of depth of field out here. So what you can do with fixed lenses like this is simply rotate until the numbers get in between the aperture you'd like to use. So let's say I want to use 16 here, then I would just rotate the aperture, put the infinity mark at the center of the 16, and know that I will get from 2 feet to infinity sharp. Piece of cake. Easy. That beats the heck out of trying to figure out where 1/3 of the way into the frame is. All right, but many people, most people, do not have these fixed lenses any longer. So you'll need something a little bit different, folks. And this next tool is invaluable. You absolutely have to have one if you want to get that deep depth of field in your landscape photography. And that is some sort of depth of field calculator. You download it onto your smartphone. The brand that I use is called Depth of Field Master. And it's relatively simple. You have to put it, or input a certain amount of information in order for it to calculate. Well, the first thing you put in is your camera type. Believe it or not, it makes a difference, right? Because a Nikon sensor is different than a Canon sensor, and a full frame sensor is different than a crop sensor. So you'd put in, you know, Nikon DSLR or Canon DSLR or Canon 5D or Nikon D700, D800. You put your camera type in. All right, next, you frame up your shot and say, okay, how do I want to compose this? All right, that looks good. And then you look at your focal length. And if you're at 18 millimeters, you put in 18 millimeter. All right, next, you decide on your f-stop. Well, as I'd mentioned before, f22 is the worst as far as giving you good image quality. The best is always right in the center, which is typically right around f8 somewhere. So if I can shoot at f8, I will, because that will be the sharpest part of my lens. If I have to stop down to 11, I will. If I have to stop down to 16, I will. But if you're thinking you really want to get everything from very close to very far away sharp, then you're immediately thinking, hey, I've got to stop down to f16, right? So then you plug in f16. You can always go back and recalculate if you want. Now, once you've put this criteria in, you go down to this, this stands for hyperfocal distance, and you press that button, and you'll get a focus distance appear up there. And it says, Tim, that's what it calls me, focus at 3.38 feet, and you will get from the near limit 1.7 feet to infinity sharp. So now all I have to do is focus it at 3 1/3 feet. And I know that I will get that sharp. So that tells me a lot of information, folks, you know? Now, your lenses don't have 3.1 feet, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4. We can't see that on our focusing scale, but you can estimate. A couple things you can do. One is I often carry a little seam strip tape measure with me, you know, those little, it's fabric and it rolls up, to roughly estimate 2 feet, 2.5, 3 feet, something like that. Also, I know that I've taken a ruler and from the tip of my finger to the center of my chest is 3 feet. So that gives me a rough idea of where these things are. So you can't always depend exactly on your focusing scale to give you it, but it will be very, very close, people. Now, this is a great tool when you're shooting wide-angle lenses, which typically we're going to be doing for landscape photography. This is not going to work for you for a 100 or a 200 millimeter lens. I mean, you can calculate stuff, but it'll tell you to focus at 96.3 feet. And you're like, where is that? You know, so it's really not that beneficial for those lenses. But when you're using wide-angle lenses, all your focusing distance are going to be 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, and you can rough that out pretty well and be pretty darn accurate. Okay, so the bottom line is depth of field, critically important to landscape photography. We want from near to far sharp. So you either use the depth of field master or an Android version, which depth of field calculator, I think they call it on an Android, or use a fixed lens, and then you won't have any problems with your depth of field. Now, the most important thing, I know I said depth of field was the most important thing. This is the most important thing now, is your camera position. Listen, you guys, we know we go to these wonderful places, and half of this group could be standing overlooking, you know, the valley in Yosemite, and we're all standing there together. What is going to make our photographs different? We all have very high quality cameras. We all have tripods. What makes it different? What's going to make it different is where you stand and the lens that you use. That's one of the very, very few tools that we have in landscape photography. We don't have a lot to differentiate our work from others' work. Where you stand, the lens you use, totally critical, all right? So I guarantee you that no matter where you stand, like, okay, so you're walking down a trail, say, for example, and you set up your tripod. You're like, ooh, I like that shot right here, and you set it up. That is absolutely the wrong spot to be in. Guaranteed. It's always going to be better right from here, or right here, or just over here a little bit, or maybe 10 feet down the trail. Wherever you put your tripod the first time, just remember that is the wrong spot. And as soon as you remember that, your photographs are going to get so much better. You've got to explore the possibilities of small changes. Small changes make huge differences, all right? In landscape photography, as a rule, what we try to do is create a foreground, a midground, and a background. So where you stand, I mean, you can well imagine, just if you guys are even in the back row looking at me, if I move here, I have very much changed the orientation between the person in front of you and myself. For me, when I move here, the people change in their direction. It is an enormous thing that we often do not think about. How our foreground and how our background are going to work together, right? We want to create some sort of semblance of order. We want a midground, a foreground, and a background. Here we have foreground. The midground is this cliff, the background is that cliff, and where I'm standing is actually determining the shape of this highlight in the frame. Does that make sense to you guys? Moving this way a little bit would cover them up. Moving this way would spread it out wider. There can be nothing more crucial than where you actually stand. All right? Here I am standing in the water, yes. So foreground, midground, and background, right? You've got a foreground element. I have a separate midground back here, and then I have a background. Not every photograph will have a foreground, midground, and background, but when you can get that, it's always, it's a good recipe for an excellent image. All right? So for example, this image does not have a foreground, midground, and background, right? It's just got the foreground and the sky is the background. But it tends to be more flat than an image like this. So that distance is created by 3 separate planes, if you will. All right? Now, what we want to do by moving our camera position is alter the relationship between our foreground and midground and background. All right? So it should be something interesting. It should make sense. It should be coherent, if you will. In this image, the clouds were kind of making a very subtle V shape. And you'll notice the rhythm here with the inverted V kind of pointing up to it. I think you can well imagine, had I been 5 feet to the right, that relationship would be off. Right? Same thing here. The camera position dictates the relationship between the foreground road and the background snowpatch. I can't impress upon you how incredibly important it is to think about how they react. So in an image like this, where that bridge is coming through, where that background is coming through the foreground here, it's everything. This is very, very careful positioning of the camera, right? To have these little sticks kind of pointing right up to the main subject, which is the fall foliage here, that takes very specific placement of the camera. You should spend by far most of your time moving your camera around, exploring every little angle, every little relationship, all right? I was walking around in Yosemite one morning, and I saw these grasses in the water, and I thought, this is cool. I got it, right? We got El Capitan reflecting in the water. We've got the green grasses. I've got this shot. I know it's gonna be good. So I took this shot, and then I'm looking at it. I'm thinking, it's really not all that good. You know, we've got grasses starting to impinge upon the reflection here. That's foreground-background relationship. I've got a pretty muddled and uninteresting foreground. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. For us, it's much easier to recognize and to read simple shapes. Circle, square, triangle. And so this is kind of an unrecognizable shape. It's a little bit chaotic. I've got more space over here than I do here. In short, it's a failure. But I'm not unaccustomed to that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move my tripod and I'm gonna look around, I'm gonna keep searching. I actually took a couple of other shots and then ended up with this one. And now we have nice circle, easy to read foreground, little space on the left, little space on the right, cloud cap coming right over the mountains, grass is no longer impinging. That's all positioning, folks. So I took that one idea and I kept looking for it. All right. Now, I think we established in the beginning that, we kind of all like being outside, right? So we shouldn't forget that our goal in landscape photography should be enjoying that outside. I know I'll get sometimes people on my workshops and they absolutely have to go home with this great shot, and I think that sort of sullies the experience a little bit, because if you're always thinking about the final outcome, you're not able to enjoy so much the moment. But when it comes to actually making photographs, what we really should do is be thinking about what our primary focus is, or what our first idea that we come across. And what I mean by that is, when you get to a place, you need to look around, and you might say, God, that's cool, that's really neat, that's really neat. You're not going to be able to make all of those shots good. You just can't do it. You don't have the time. We just don't have it. So what you want to do is say, okay, out of all those, I like that best. All right, here we go. And then dive in and really work on that image, all right? So here's a classic example of this. This is the way I photograph all the time. I got to this little reservoir in Montana, and I thought, okay, I see my idea. I like this. I like the S-curve. I like the mountains, the clouds, and the moon. That is my idea. So I'm gonna work, ooh, look, a squirrel. No, don't do it. Stay focused, you guys. Stay focused on that idea, right? So here I had my camera set up, and I took a shot, and then I said, okay, well, how about a horizontal? I tried a horizontal, see what that looks like. Light changed again, and I'm still in the same position, so now I'm ready to shoot that shot. And then ultimately, there was one or two other compositions, and I ended up with the shot that I really liked. But had I gone after that squirrel, I would have never got this shot. So I would much rather see you all come home with one truly awesome image that you love and you'll hang on your wall than 30 or 40 different images that you're just gonna go, yep, okay, when do I get to go back? You know? So take one idea and really try to make it work. Explore different compositions, explore different lenses with that composition. Watch how the light changes and really stay focused. And I think your experience will be better, you know? Okay, same thing here. Coast of North Carolina, and I saw this little structure, and I was like, okay, I'm going to try about a 4 or 6 second exposure to get the water, that that sort of just a cotton candy look. So I did. I shot it. I think this was 4 seconds, and I got it, and I was like, ooh, cool, nailed it, first shot. But I thought, let me keep shooting. This time I'll try waiting for 1 more second when the wave hits the beach. So then I hit that and I thought, oh, that's cool. I'm really liking this circular effect, but now it's too close to the bottom of the frame. So I shot again. And this time I saw these little ridges in the water. And I'm thinking, oh, this is just getting better and better, And then after a few other shots, I ultimately ended up with this one, which kind of pulled it all together. But if you just take that one shot and move on, ultimately you're probably not going to end up with as high a quality of an image as you may have in the beginning. Hey, guess what? The most important thing in landscape photography is the lens you choose. It's true. Just like moving your position around, just like changing from here to here. This is so incredibly important, you guys. And most of us don't really realize how much this affects our scene. So let's take a look at these lenses and see what they do. Let's assume that we are going to make a photograph of this red ball. And what we're going to do is fill the frame with our red ball. So we'll fill it top to bottom. Okay, if we have a wide angle lens, we need to be pretty close to that red ball. All right, now, we all know a wide angle lens has a pretty wide field of view, right? So we're going to be able to pick up from all the way up here to all the way down here while we're filling our frame with the red ball. Okay, now, if I put on a longer lens, just say, whatever, say 100mm lens, and I still want to fill my frame with the red ball, I've got to do what? I've got to back up, right? Okay, so I back up, and now I reframe my shot so that I'm filling the frame with my red ball. Well, a longer focal length has a very narrow field of view. What am I picking up in the background now, you guys? Isn't that incredible? Almost nothing. Before I was picking up all this stuff and all this stuff, all that. Now I'm not seeing any of that. This is so critical to us because in landscapes, what are we trying to do? Foreground, midground, and background. And we're trying to create a relationship between those 3 areas. So the fact that one lens includes a lot and one lens includes very little, that's going to be an important player. So your wide angle lenses make your background seem real small, but they add a lot of it. Okay. They create illusions of greater than normal space. And they exaggerate your foreground subject size. And they also give a great amount of depth of field, but we kind of know that. All right, so makes background appear smaller. This is so important, you guys. This is a fairly big mountain. It's like about 3,000 feet high. All right, the size of, whoa, hey, stop that, get back. The size of this brush here dominates the frame. It's much bigger than the mountain is. The background got much, much smaller. All right, here we've got almost 5,000 foot peaks from here to here. Look how small they are in the frame. Quite literally, this rock is much bigger than the mountains. And yes, we know because we're familiar with mountains that they're tall, but in this picture, they're not. So this picture is not about the height of the mountains, but the width of them, because wide angle lenses include a lot of space. But they make the background seem very, very small, and they tend to exaggerate the foreground size. All right? So here you can see those distant peaks back there, once again, enormous in stature. But any one of those individual 1 foot tall brushes are bigger than the mountains. So if you're trying to show the height of something in the background, a wide-angle lens is a very poor choice because it shrinks its size but shows a lot of it. This field of teasel is about maybe 8 feet, 10 feet deep, but yet it looks like it could be yards and yards and yards long. And it just is not. It's very narrow. So we get that creation of massive amounts of space with our wide-angle lenses. And they tend to really exaggerate the foreground. So here, this bush is only about this big, but it feels huge. Now, in order to get this, you've got to be right on top of things. So when we're talking about landscapes, a very typical technique is to do something like David Munch did or does, where he gets right on top of a subject with a wide-angle lens. If you are that far from a subject with your wide-angle lens, it's going to seem huge like this in the foreground. All right? So here, this flower, oops, I'm sorry, this flower in here, this section of flower seems very, very big compared to the background. It's because I'm about 1.5 feet, 2 feet away from it. But as you start to back up, then the foreground shrinks a little bit. So now this bush is about 1 foot or 2 feet in front of my feet, which means it's quite a distance from the camera. And it feels small again. It feels in proper relationship to the background. So you're only going to get that really exaggerated foreground when you're very close to something. So as a landscape photographer, I spend a lot of time on my knees with that tripod down low to the ground to get those kind of big, wide, sweeping landscape shots. Now, we can say that wide-angle lenses give us a lot of depth of field. So it should be easier for us to make things very sharp with a wide-angle lens, right? Okay, well that's true. Compared to say a 100mm lens, for sure, that's true. The only problem is with wide-angle lenses, we like to make that foreground look big, so we get really close to it. Well, when you get really close to it, now your depth of field decreases because you get more depth of field when you're further from your focusing subject distance. You get less depth of field the closer you are. So in a situation like this, I'm as close as I can be to these grasses to still get the depth of field at f/16. So again, that's probably putting me at 2 feet, 2.5 feet, something like that. All right.
What's the focal length?
That, I believe, is a 16mm on a full frame sensor. Same thing here, right down on that ice plant, trying to get it all nice and sharp. All right, now, telephoto, folks, is just kind of the opposite of our wide angle. So instead of making the background seem smaller, it makes the background seem much bigger. Instead of spreading out, it compresses. And it isolates the subject. And of course, it's easier to get a shallow amount of depth of field. I don't know if you've ever tried to blur the background out with a wide-angle lens. It's almost impossible. You just can't do it. Right? With a longer lens, very easy to get shallow depth of field. So look at the compression that occurs here. These two hillsides are probably, I don't know, 1/4 mile, 1/2 mile apart. But the long lens compresses them together, makes it feel as if they're right on top of each other. So you can use this as a technique. I'm not quite sure why that slide is there. It's supposed to be shallow depth of field, but it seems to be out of place here. But at any rate, I don't often go for a really shallow depth of field in my landscape photographs. But I would say in nature photography, I will do that a little bit more. And so here's a case where I'm using a longer lens to really get a very narrow depth of field. Isolate subject matter. You guys, this is a pretty interesting photograph because I'm really misleading you here. And perhaps that's because I've lived in Washington, D.C. for too long. But I am misleading you to think something completely different than what is the truth. This mountainside in Zion is, let's say it's as wide as the front of this room here. This cloud is just about that, whoops, the cloud is just about that much. Here there is no cloud, here there's no cloud, here there's no cloud. If you were to look up, you'd see all this red wall and then just one little cloud dipping in. But that long lens, I've isolated and excluded everything else to make it appear like everywhere around us is nothing but clouds and there's just something a little bit poking out. And not at all the case. But those long lenses can fool us. And they can really isolate the subject matter like this like this river cutting through a forest of burnt out trees. Makes the background feel bigger, a lot bigger, right? If you want to make a mountain feel tall or a building feel tall, you're going to use a long lens and put it right near the top of the frame. Notice how close I have that mountain to the top of the frame. When you put the mountain close to the top of the frame, it gives it stature. Now, this is in the Sierra Nevada, and you know Sierra Nevada runs darn near the whole length of California. You know, I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles long. But in this case, I'm seeing nothing to the right, nothing to the left, nothing to the right, but just one peak. So I'm excluding a lot of background, but I'm making what I see very, very big. Okay? Now, normal lenses, well, normal lenses are tough for landscape photography, people. I'm not gonna lie. It's the truth. I find that to make a great landscape with a normal lens is probably the most difficult thing you can do.
What do you call
a normal lens is a 50mm lens on a full frame or a 35mm lens on a crop sensor. And the reason that it's so hard is because that normal lens portrays the scene before us as we see it. And that's the trick. We don't want to see it as we see it. That's boring. The moment you put on a wide-angle lens, you're lying to your viewer. The moment you put on a long lens, you're lying to your viewer. They cannot see that. They'll be like, oh my gosh, I've never seen anything like that before. Well, that's because you can't. It's an impossibility. So a good cheat is to use a long lens and a wide-angle lens. You're always going to end up having a more dynamic image. But with a normal lens, it is as we see it. So there's no real, you know, the foreground isn't enlarging, the background's not enlarging, we're not compressing or spreading out. Everything is just kind of as it is. But if you look back to some of the great masters that were shooting with the view cameras, they didn't have extreme wide-angle lenses or extreme long lenses, and they made these beautiful images with fairly close to normal lenses. It takes a lot more effort to make a great photograph with a normal lens. So I've got to say that some of my favorite photographs are made with very close to normal lenses, but I have very, very few of them. Very few. Almost all my favorites are either wide or long. So I urge you guys to go out and try your normal lenses simply because it's a really good exercise to strengthen your compositional skills. It's definitely, definitely hard to do. At least I find it hard to do. Here's the crux of it, you guys. This is what we do. We get to a point, we set up our tripod. That's that three-legged thing, you guys, that's in your basement. Landscape photography, you need a tripod, always. You set up your tripod, and we're like, oh, let's see, zoom, 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 zoom. Okay, there it is, click, and we shoot. That's the bulk of the way we work, and we've got to get away from that. Now, if you're just standing in one spot, you're not exploring your scene. We know that. But let's just take a look and see what happens here. So we stand here, we're shooting at a 20. Notice how big the creek is here. Very, very large, engulfing the frame, just not at all interesting. But as we zoom in now to a 24, it gets a little smaller. And into 40, the foreground is even smaller yet. Now the background is starting to get really quite large. And by the time we get into a 90, now the background mountain is huge. Now compare that to the 20 millimeter. Look how tiny the mountain is there and how big it is at 90. All right? So that's standing in one place, and that's generally what we don't want to do. All right? Instead, let's try different positions with different lenses. So to me, this is just a classic example of what you can do when you're out in the field. Olmsted Point in California, and I want you guys to see that because this is a 17 millimeter lens, I do feel, or I am getting a lot of distance or depth to this image, right? We can feel all of the space here that goes all the way back to, to Half Dome. Now, the things that I want you to pay attention to here is how much of the background we're including, how small Half Dome is, and the separation between these foreground rocks. Okay, wide angle lens. Now, I want to frame up the same exact shot, but this time what I want to do is use a longer lens. So in order to do that, I've got to back up, right? I have to change my position. So I back up and put on a 40. Now look at how much more compression I'm getting in these rocks than right back here. Also, look at how little of this background I'm seeing compared to the previous. With the 40, I'm only seeing that, and now I'm not getting any of that at all. All right, let's back up a little bit more. 60. Now all of these rocks are starting to merge together, right? And Half Dome has grown quite a bit in stature. 80 millimeter, even more. Look at how little depth we have now. We're not seeing any of that mountainside off to the left that we were when we started. You guys, this is the same exact photograph. I can't impress upon you enough how important this is. What do you see? What do you want? That's two completely different interpretations of the scene, but it's exactly the same scene. You have absolutely got to consider these things when you're out there photographing. And that takes moving your body, changing your lenses, imagining, knowing the properties of the lenses, right? But this is really the only true tool that we have as landscape photographers, right? I can't bring in fans to blow the model's hair and big light scrims, and we got what we got. So this is one of our few tools that we can use. The most important thing about landscape photography, you guys, is the light. All right, we've got to have the right light. We've got to make lemonade when we get lemons. Too often we get an idea in our mind. Oh, I'm gonna head up to Vermont in the fall, and I'm gonna shoot fall foliage, and I'm gonna get a backlit sun star coming through the foliage. You get up there, it's overcast. Well, don't take that shot with the sun star coming through, because it's not gonna look good. Change your way of thinking to the prevailing light. Shoot for the prevailing light, whatever it may be. All right, so there's different types of things we want to do on sunny days, cloudy days, and during our magic light time. For sunny days, well, let's start off. Are sunny days flat, or are they contrasty? Contrasty. Does anybody go for flat? No? Okay. That's a bright sunny day, you guys. Is that a flat or a contrasty scene? Flat. Super flat. No contrast to it at all. So what happens is, depending on the angle of the sun, you can either be have really flat light or have a very contrasty scene as well. And that all depends on where you're standing and where the sun is. All right. The best thing you can do, the second best thing you can do on a blank blue sky day, and you know, in like hikers and fishermen stuff, they call them like bluebird days. You know, we call them terrible because they're, you know, but the second best thing you can do on a blank blue sky day like this is just to shoot a big broad scene. That's going to control the contrast in a way that's going to make the image tolerable. All right? So if you're forced to shoot under these conditions, shoot a big, broad scene. Right? Here's a beautiful, beautiful fall foliage in Colorado. The scene is not exciting, you guys. It's not. As much as I was just itching to pull my, I was itching to take a picture, but it's not a great picture. The scene is beautiful, the photograph is not. And it's because the light is super flat. Now, if I go down into that forest, what happens then? Then the light is really contrasty, right? Because I'm getting all these shadows and light, and that's when the scene becomes contrasty. So, if I have to shoot in scenes like this, I'll shoot the big, broad scenes, and I won't go down into the forest and shoot the contrasty scenes, okay? Now, really, truly, the best thing to do on these big, in these bluebird days is to nap. But if somebody's gonna wake you up and force you to take pictures, shoot the big, broad scenes, all right? Now, all we need is a couple of clouds to roll in, and nap time is over. Because if you've got clouds on a bright sunny day, this is in the middle of the day. This is like, I think it's almost exactly 12 noon. But clouds make the difference. Clouds add some shadowing, some light, highlight, and that's it. That's all you need. And you can start making great images again. But it's those severely blue sky days that we find so insufferable. So if you're going to shoot on a blue sky day, just don't include a lot of blue sky, you guys. There's just no reason to do so. Half of this frame almost is taken up with the blue sky, and all that blue sky is exactly the same. There's nothing to it. So instead, just crop a little bit off. Just give a hint of the blue sky on the top and let the landscape speak for itself. All right. If you're fortunate enough to have clouds, be patient. Be patient. Clouds are really an essential element when they're included in a scene. They become essential. These clouds here are very chaotic. They make no sense to the scene before us. They don't have a rhythm with the foreground. They don't have they're not mimicking the foreground shape at all. They're not in any understandable or recognizable form. They're just blah, there they are. So when you're in a situation like this, wait. Watch the clouds change. They will change. They always do. Here I waited probably, I don't even know, maybe about a half an hour. But waiting for half an hour in a situation like this is not all that bad. Pretty beautiful, right? But I waited, and then eventually that came by. That's enough to really change the feeling of the overall image. So try to make the clouds make sense with your landscape. Your clouds become a background, and you want your foreground and background to make sense with one another. All right? Or in a situation like this, here you can feel the line being drawn right up to this peak, and then you have a little gap here in which to go out. It makes sense. Here we've got the cloud coming off of the mountain peak and getting real large in the top. But again, we've got, a line in here, and then a gap in the cloud. The pattern of the cloud is crucial. Just random clouds are not good enough for us, you guys. Not good enough. Also, on a bright sunny day, backlighting is awesome, right? Especially in the fall. So consider that. If I'm out shooting in the autumn and it's a clear day, I'm just doing backlit photographs all day long until the clouds come out. All right, now cloudy days, no time for napping, right? Cloudy days you can photograph all day long because the light just tends to envelop your subjects, and it surrounds it in such a beautiful way that there's no time to rest. There's only one simple trick. Simply don't include any sky. There's no reason to see any sky on a cloudy day. This is the time that you want to shoot waterfalls and streams and things like that. Time for the intimate landscape. Just don't include the sky. And you can shoot all day long. Now, a lot of people will purchase neutral density filters for this job. And that's not always terribly necessary. Although I recommend you have a neutral density filter, I don't think that you necessarily need one for shooting streams and waterfalls, because you should really only be shooting streams and waterfalls on an overcast day. And when your day is overcast and you're using a slow ISO and a polarizer to bring out the colors, you're invariably going to be shooting at 1/4 of a second or 1/2 a second, which is about what you need anyway. All right, so there's really no reason to do that. So the whole idea of using a neutral density filter to slow your water down on a bright sunny day, you don't even really want to be shooting that kind of water on a bright sunny day anyway. All right. Now, magic light, that's, the word says it all, right? It's magic, it's beautiful. I love this time of day for a lot of reasons, but one of them, and probably the most important thing, is that to me, you're getting the best light on the landscape and the best light on the clouds and the distant background at this time of day. So the only trick is that you will have a very dark foreground and a very bright background. So you're going to need either split neutral density filters, or you will need to use HDR. But the reason that I like it is because I enjoy the late light on the clouds and on mountains. But when it's raking the land at that point, it's not always going to be the best. Sometimes it'll be awesome. But here you can see, notice how contrasty this foreground looks. It's kind of like, it's a lot of black, white, black, white, black, white, black, white. It's not the greatest thing, but I love the background here. So what I want to do is I want to combine those two times of day. Now I've got soft light on my foreground because it's being blocked by either a cloud or a distant peak or something, and then the hard light on the background. And it's that perfect mix. But in order to get this kind of a shot, split neutral density or HDR. It's the only way to do it. All right. So let's look at why the qualities are so awesome at this time of day. Color, angle, and contrast. Our Earth has, as you guys know, a little atmosphere around it. And that atmosphere is going to alter the way colors of light penetrate. So at high noon, the light is going through X amount of atmosphere. But at the end of the day, when the sun is much further down in the sky, it's going through a lot more atmosphere. And that more atmosphere is going to block the cooler blue rays of the sun. And what penetrates is the warmer orange rays. So that's why we get such warm colors at the beginning and the end of the day. All right, that's why we see our sunsets as orange, because of this very thing. Now, you can kind of translate that into what's called the Kelvin scale, where our light in the middle of the day is what we would consider 5,500 degrees Kelvin. And then the light in the middle of the day is kind of white, you know? But at sunset, really nice and warm, right? 3,100, 3,000, 3,200. Cloudy days, of course, very blue. And open shade is 10,000. Very, very blue, all right? So another form of open shade is when the sun is below the horizon, sunrise, sunset, doesn't matter, and it's time to go out and shoot, but there's no sun. Well, if there's no sun, the only thing that's actually illuminating us is the blue sky. And that's why pictures taken at this time of day are really moody and blue. You know, this is like a 30-second exposure, probably about half an hour after the sun went down. All right. But as that sun starts to creep up in that sky in the morning, things start to get a little bit warmer. All right. Now, this is salt flats in Death Valley, and the salt flats are white. Look at the color of that salt. It's really severely blue, isn't it? Now, just a couple minutes later, after the sun starts hitting those clouds, now the clouds are throwing down more light on the land, than the sky is. And now you can see the salt is actually pink, the same color as the clouds, that magenta color. Color is so important, you guys, and when we see that orange and blue mixed together, it's a very high color contrast that we find quite appealing. So it's a good recipe for success if you want to catch somebody's eye, mixing that orange and blue together. All right. Here's a little point and shoot outside my hotel room in Boston, and you can see that this scene lacks any depth to it at all. No shadows. It's actually a blue sky day right before the sun came up. So what happens, like 1 minute after the sun comes up, the scene drastically changes. Color is so important. It plays such an important role how we see a scene. All right? Red rock country out in Utah. Middle of the day, not very red. But at sunrise, really quite brilliant in its saturation. In this scene, we've got red rocks that are the same tone. So this rock here, folks, is the same color rock as this rock back in here. It's just one is in the shade and one is in the last bit of sunlight. And you can see how blue or neutral those other rocks are in the back and how warm the foreground rocks are. So, go ahead.
Sunset.
Sunset. So color plays an important role, and at this time of day, we get great color. All right. Now, the magic hours again are hour before the sun goes down, hour after the sun goes down, roughly about that. Same thing in the morning. Roughly an hour before the sun comes up to an hour after the sun comes up. And at that time, our angle of the sun is really low, as we know. And that low angle can do really nice things for your foreground. All right. A low sun angle is going to sort of rake the land, and every little shadow is going to come to the fore, so that you feel like you could almost, if you could reach your hand in there and rub it, you would know exactly how it would feel. That depth, that texture is being caused by the shadows. If this was the middle of the day and the sun was coming straight down from overhead, these tractor marks would be gone. You wouldn't even see them because there'd be no shadow there. So shadow reveals depth, and that's an important thing in our photographs, especially when we're trying to make a three-dimensional landscape onto a two-dimensional computer screen or a print. All right. So in here you can see how the light is kind of wrapping around and forming the hillside here. You know what the shape of the hillside is because of that low angle of light. Cloudy day, this would be terrible. It would be so uninteresting. Now, the amount of contrast is also going to be controlled by the angle. So when we have a low sun angle, some of that light can sometimes pitch back in, fill in from either low clouds in the sky or in some cases even off the atmosphere itself. And adding that extra little bit of fill light in can do wonders for your photographs. So this is a shot where, let's see, if you're looking at the scene this way, the sun is setting there, the light is coming up and hitting off the bottom of a cloud and filling in all of this area in here. That's a very unusual situation, all right? That's also happening in this scene. Light's coming up, bouncing off of a cloud, and filling in this whole area. So that low angle presents other benefits to us as well. Look at this scene in the middle of the day. Middle of the day, we've got deep, dark shadows just plopped down everywhere. Now, you know, with modern technology, we could easily go in and lighten up these shadows. I mean, it's just no big deal. But it's more than just the darkness in the shadows. It's the placement of the shadows. So what's happening here is instead of enjoying, you know, this little flower in the foreground and kind of a neat looking cliff on the ocean, what we're doing is we're just seeing light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. And that's the way we're reading this photograph. And that's not a pleasant way. So what we want to do is we want to enjoy the overall shape or the overall essence of the scene. And you're just not getting that in the middle of the day because of the chaotic shadow structure. So, you know, a lot of people, when they're faced with bad light, they'll say, oh, you know, I could just do HDR and lighten up those shadows. Just remember, it's not just how dark the shadows are, it's the placement that also makes it, you know, undesirable. But now look at the same cliffside at sunset. Vastly different, right? Now, we don't have that staccato light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, but we're able just to sort of absorb the whole scene and enjoy the cliffside and the, you know, and the distant ocean and the clouds. Now, what I try to do whenever I'm photographing is to be able to get in a position where at sunrise and sunset I can look in both directions. So this is my Zion National Park workshop, and you know, some clouds were peeking up back here, so everybody turned and started shooting. And I let them shoot for a little bit. I was like, okay, you guys got to turn around now because really all the action is behind us, you know? So that sunrise, sunset time, this is actually not sunset, you guys, right? Sunset is when the ball is right on the horizon. This is called civil twilight. And civil twilight is part of that magic hour that is so brilliant to photograph. But in order to capture these things, you guys, we might need some different tools. Split neutral density filter is one of those tools. Now, I've got to tell you, I don't use them any longer. I used them for 15 years. It's all we had, and it worked pretty well. But once you know, digital imaging started becoming real strong, I've moved to Photoshop and HDR programs to make it work. Now, in order to use a split neutral density filter, which is clear on the bottom and neutral density on the top, you've got to have some way to attach it to your camera. So you can buy them in a 3-stop hard, 2-stop soft, 1-stop soft. I think you can even get a 3-stop soft. There's lots of different options. If I was going to recommend just two, it would be the 2-stop soft, 3-stop hard. All right. So you buy yourself a Koken adapter ring that will fit onto each lens. So this one's a 58 millimeter. You can see that up here. You know, if you had a 67, you'd buy that. 72, you'd buy that. And then this is universal. The Koken P filter holder is universal. That will go up on the ring. And then you simply drop in the filter in the little grooves in the front here. And here you can see, you know, that's your darker landscape being illuminated, and this is your brighter sky in the background being darkened down by the density. All right. So here's a shot without any neutral density filter, and then with a 1-stop neutral density filter. All right. Just adds a little bit of interest into that sky. So the question is how, uh-oh, my numbers got messed up here. Sorry about that, you guys. How are we going to meter for this scene? Well, if you think about this, it's really pretty simple. All right. What we need to do is we need to expose correctly for the foreground because that's our clear glass. Then we have to figure out how bright our background is so we know which filter to pull down. All right. So I tend to shoot in manual and I use spot meter. That's the way I work. But if you're using aperture priority, this is what you would need to do. You would literally need to zoom in on your foreground and get a meter reading. Now that meter reading says 1/15 at f11. That's what you're going to photograph at. No matter what comes next, you're going to make the exposure at 1/15 at f11. All right? Now we need to find out how bright the background is. So we can zoom up and look at that, and of course you're in aperture priority, so your numbers automatically change on you. And now it says a 60th at f11. How many stops brighter is the background than the foreground?
2.
2 stops. So what you're going to do is you're going to recompose, and you need to shoot at a 15th at f11. But it might not say a 15th at f11 when you recomposed. It may say a 45th or a 30th, or who knows what it's going to say. But we know that we wanted it to be a 15th at f11 because that's what our first one was, right, you guys? All right, so we want to shoot at a 15th at f11. Well, you can use your exposure compensation dial, or me, I put it in manual. and set it to a 15th at f11, and then you just drag your neutral density filter down to make the scene come in. All right. But like I said, I use manual and spot metering. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to meter my foreground average tonality, and I'll zero out my meter. So I'll move this little hash mark here right into the center, and that gives me a half at 13. Okay, well, I'm in manual mode now, so it doesn't matter, nothing is going to change. It's going to shoot at half at 13, so I'm set there. But now I just simply have to find out how bright the background is. So I'll put my spot meter up into the sky, and the hash mark moves 2 stops up. So that tells me I need a 2-stop neutral density filter. Again, I don't have to change any other numbers. My camera's already set where it needs to be. So I just recompose and then drop down that split neutral density filter. All right. Now, the reason that I don't like using split neutral density filters anymore is twofold. One, because it's more glass in front of your lens. We've already talked about that a little bit. The other reason is to get a full system of glass, you're spending more money than you would for a simple computer program to fix it. Number 3, you get this kind of gradient feel to it, which I don't like. So quite literally, the red here is the same color as the red here, but it's darker in this frame. That's not real. That's not what it actually looks like. So I tend to use the computer to blend things together. This is a shot before HDR came out, manually blending together in Photoshop, but you'll notice there's no gradient going through here. All the colors look natural, you know, and it's going to give you a much more realistic sense of the scene. All right. So what we're going to do for when we encounter scenes that have lots and lots of contrast in them, we need to shoot multiple exposures to blend together into an HDR program such as Photomatix. All right, well, how many shots? Hard to say. Could be 2, could be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You never know. Every scene is going to be different. All right, so in this scene, it took 6 shots. And in the first shot here, I've got good highlight detail. Then I open up by 1 stop and shoot, open up by 1 stop, shoot, open up, until I get good shadow detail. And then you can blend them all together in the HDR program and get the proper amount of detail in both the highlights and the shadows. All right, so how are we going to do that? Well, the easiest thing is just to start with your highlights. Take a shot and look at your histogram. You want to have good detail in your histogram. The brightest thing in this scene is the blue sky, and the blue sky is right here in the histogram, and it's almost in the center, and that's a good spot for a blue sky. So that's 1 second at f16, so I take that shot. The next one, I open up 1 stop to 2 seconds at f16. I take that shot, and then open up, stop again, 4 seconds. Now I've got good shadow detail in my histogram. All right, so now I'll take those 3 shots and then blend them together in the HDR program to produce the final image. And once again, you can see the soft, cloudy-like light on the foreground, but the hard, bright sunshine and warm color of the sun going down on the background. And to me, that's a really nice blend of features. All right, so for blending images together, I use a program called Photomatix. Before you ask, yes, I have used the other ones, and I just haven't found them as nice as Photomatix. So Photomatix is what I prefer. You can buy it from hdrsoft.com, and 15% off, you guys, if you put my name in. All right, so capital T, capital C, all one word, and that'll get you 15% off. Hey, listen, you guys, before you go, I know there's a couple other questions, but I just want to let you know a couple of things. First of all, thanks for coming out today, you guys. We really appreciate seeing you here. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.